Hey folks, this is Dr. Mike Kiefer. I'm an energy alchemist. I want to give you a little bit of my background so that you know where I'm coming from in doing the series of videos that we're going to be doing, um, talking about various aspects of holistics, how I got into this, what my background is. We want to make sure that everybody that watches our videos and our sites has a firm understanding of what we do, how we started, and what our education is. So, my background, I was born and raised in upstate New York. I went to college at the State University of New York at Buffalo. I got a Bachelor of Science degree in genetic engineering. I then went to Texas A&M University, got a master's degree in genetic engineering, and then later on I got a PhD in behavioral psychology from Addison University, specializing in conscious, subconscious, and superconscious mental models. Today, a lot of that research and that work is falling under what we call NLP, or neuro linguistic programming. I worked in the agricultural genetics field in private industry for 8 years. I started my career after Texas A&M, and I worked in animal growth hormone genetics, basically modifying the food chain. I worked on genetics projects dealing with dairy cows, dealing with pigs, and then I moved into plant genetics and I ran a DNA fingerprint research lab on modifying hybrid seed corn, soybeans, and alfalfa. I hit my late 20s and, like many of you, became disgruntled with my career. I was like, well, this is what I'm trained to do in college. Should I be doing this for the next 30 years of my life? And I thought, this really isn't my natural talent. This really isn't the fit for me. So I started talking with upper management at the company, and they were gracious enough to say, hey, well, if you want to take personal development classes, if you want to take continuing education classes, we'll pay for that, and you can go to various colleges and universities. And I'm in Farmington, Minnesota. That's where I live. And they paid for classes for me to go to the University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management, the University of St. Thomas. And I started taking continuing education classes, adult learning classes, like half day workshops, full day workshops, 2 day workshops. Many of you work in organizations where your organization will pay for you to take 1 day workshops, 2 day workshops, etc. And so I did that. I started taking classes on supervision and management and personality styles and team building and Six Sigma, manufacturing, project management. I just started taking everything. I just started taking all kinds of classes. I was taking a class a week, sometimes two classes a week, and it changed my perspective. When I went to college, I hung out mainly with scientists, biologists, genetic engineers, and that was a good education for doing genetic engineering, but I didn't have a lot of experience dealing with people skills and different types of people and management and delegation and discipline and onboarding and hiring people. So I was like, this is all black box stuff that I never learned about in college. And it started to fascinate me. And then one of the classes I took was by a psychological profiler. And he basically went around the classroom and asked everybody 3 or 4 questions. And then he went back around the room and he told everybody about their childhood, their parents, gave some personality characteristics that I had. And I was fascinated by that. And I said, whoa, I need to learn that. It's like, how do you do that? How can you gather so much information from just a few questions with a person? And I talked to him after the class and I said, what is it actually that you do? And he said, well, I travel around the country and I teach people relationship skills and communication skills and things like that. And he said, I make money at it. I do life coaching. I do presentations. And I'm like, well, I want to do that. And he said, well, what's your background? And I gave him my background in plant genetics and animal genetics. And he said, well, why don't you start here? And he turned me on to the personal development field. I started basically in the 1930s, 1920s, 1940s researching motivational speakers, success philosophers, and I looked at people like Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, Brian Tracy, Jim Rohn. Some of you may be familiar with Tony Robbins, very popular motivational speaker. And I looked at those individuals, and then I started looking at other topic areas. I started looking at miraculous healings, people that were told by their doctors that they were going to die in 2 months or 6 months. And then they went through a miraculous healing, they were cured, and they lived another 10, 20, 30 years. And that fascinated me. I was like, well, what's up with that? How does that happen to somebody? Then I started studying Olympic athletes, and not just all Olympic athletes, but Olympians that were told they could never be an athlete, Olympians that were born with a defect or crippled, and then 15 years later, they're running in the Olympics. Professional athletes who were told that they would never make it to the NFL or the NBA, and then they became professional athletes. So I started looking at people that were either average or way below average who then became superstars. And I looked at their backgrounds, their family history, their parents, their brothers, their sisters, researching them on the internet, looking at biographies, autobiographies, their stories. In some cases, I was able to interview surviving relatives, their children, their grandchildren. In some cases, talk to the individual themselves and have them tell me their childhood, their background, what traumas they overcame to become who they are today. All of that fascinated me because I wanted to know what made them successful. And I started a research project called the Power Mind Project to try and figure out what happened to these individuals. How does a person go from homeless, begging for dollars and dimes and quarters on the streets of Minneapolis to 5 years later being a multimillionaire running a 500 or 1,000 person company? Something happened. Something triggered these individuals, and they followed some sort of a pathway, had some sort of an awakening, had some sort of spiritual shift, which enabled them to transform their lives from where they were to where they are today. And that's what I wanted to study with the Power Mind Project. What happened? What was the trigger? What was the process? What was the methodology that enabled them to do that? Because I didn't see myself in that position. I saw myself as maybe an above average individual in regards to intelligence, but I had not achieved anything like these people had achieved. And I wanted to know their secrets to success. So that was the driving factor on creating the Power Mind system. And then I transformed that into a book and published it for people to read so that they could learn what happens to individuals that go through miraculous healing, self-made millionaire, homeless to riches, etc. In 1996, I published that book and it went international in 2 months of publication. That launched my career as a professional motivational speaker, traveled around the country doing seminars, workshops, weekend retreats, helping individuals, helping couples, helping people understand how to go through that transition from eat, work, sleep, repeat lifestyle into expressing and awakening to their full potential. I did that for 2 years through the book, enabled me to get speaking engagements, quit my job in the genetics field, became a full time speaker 97, 98. As I did the presentations, people would come up to me after a presentation and they would say, "Hey, Mike, you know, that was a great presentation, was a great half day workshop, was a great 2 day workshop. Would you work with me as an individual and coach me and help me overcome trauma, help me with my relationship, help me awaken to what my potential is, what my true potential is?" So in 1997, I basically began a lot of life coaching with individuals to train them more in a one on one or a couple situation in the methods of the Power Mind system. So since 1997, this is what I've done. Worked with hundreds of people throughout the country, people in other countries, helping them personally, in person, online, to go through those types of transformations so that they can express their true potential.